She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Shut your mouth and pay up. That's all you're good for anyway." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue back. I just went home, opened my laptop, and in less than 2 minutes, I stopped being her personal ATM. 4 clicks. By midnight, everything had changed. 2 weeks later, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. $2,850. That number hung over Eleanor like a dark cloud every single month. At 68, she should have been out in the backyard of her cozy suburban home just outside Chicago, tending her roses and finally enjoying some peace. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table staring at the stack of bills. It had been 5 years since her husband passed, and she'd been carrying the weight in silence ever since. Her son Nathan and his wife Brooke lived with her under the same roof, but the house didn't feel like hers anymore. It started small. First, they asked for help with the down payment on a new car. Then, it was covering the utility bills. Before long, Eleanor was paying for everything: the mortgage, the insurance, even Brooke's shopping sprees on her credit cards. Brooke called it family support, but Eleanor knew it was straight up taking advantage. She cooked, she cleaned, and she paid. Always paid. That Tuesday evening, they were all at the dinner table. Eleanor had made pot roast just the way Nathan liked it. She only wanted to bring up a small adjustment to the household expenses because heating oil prices had gone up. "Nathan, we need to talk about the bills," she said calmly. Before Nathan could even open his mouth, Brooke slammed her fork down on her plate. Her face twisted with pure contempt. "God, Eleanor, would you quit your whining?" she hissed. Nathan just stared at his food, too embarrassed to look his mom in the eye. He'd become a shell of himself. Brooke leaned in, her voice cold and sharp as broken glass. "Shut your mouth and keep paying. That's the only thing you're still good for in this house. You're the bank, nothing more." 4 seconds of dead silence filled the room. Eleanor counted them in her head the same way she'd counted everything in life, with quiet precision. She didn't feel angry, just a sudden crystal-clear chill in her chest. She stood up without a word, carried her plate to the sink, and rinsed it off. Nathan glanced at her for a split second, but said nothing. No, that was out of line. No apology. Eleanor walked upstairs to her room and locked the door behind her. The hook was set. The decision was made. Up in her room, Eleanor opened her laptop. The screen lit up her determined face. She wasn't a woman of big, dramatic speeches. She was a woman of action. For decades, she'd handled all the family finances. She knew every password, every due date, every account number. Brooke probably figured Eleanor was just a helpless old lady who didn't know her way around online banking. Big mistake. First, she logged into the bank portal. There was the joint account that handled the mortgage on the house. Eleanor owned the place outright, but she'd let Nathan and Brooke live there rent-free while she covered all the fixed costs. Mortgage auto payment, $2,150. Delete. Confirm. A little green checkmark popped up. It felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years. Next came the utilities. The electric company pulled $180 a month. She canceled the authorization. Then the homeowner's insurance, $420. Gone. Finally, she opened the tab for Brooke's credit card, which was linked to a sub-account on Eleanor's investments. Minimum payment this month, $4,200 for designer bags and vacations Eleanor had never been invited on. 4 clicks, 90 seconds. 17 years of quietly sacrificing her own security undone before midnight. Eleanor closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, a steady Midwest rain lashed against the glass. Her hands didn't shake. She felt perfectly calm. "Shut your mouth and pay," Brooke had said. From now on, Eleanor would stay quiet, but she wouldn't be paying another single dime. She sat on the edge of her bed and thought about her late husband. He would have given her a quiet nod. He'd always admired her practical smarts. Eleanor knew the coming days would be stormy, but she'd already made preparations that went way beyond the internet. She had no intention of being pushed out of her own home. It was time to rewrite the rules in her house without raising her voice once. Tomorrow, the silence would begin. The next morning, Eleanor woke up before the alarm. She went to the kitchen but only made coffee for herself, one single cup. When Nathan stumbled in hair messy and expecting his usual service, he found the pot empty. He looked at her confused. She just kept reading her newspaper, not even glancing up. "Mom, is the coffee ready?" he asked hesitantly. Eleanor turned the page without looking at him. She'd decided she was done playing maid. If she was only good for being the bank, then the bank was closed for renovations starting today. Nathan sighed and started making his own coffee, something he hadn't done in years. Brooke showed up a little later, looking smug. Like her outburst the night before had finally put Eleanor in her place. She sat at the table, waiting to be served breakfast. But Eleanor just rinsed her own mug and left the room. No accusations, no arguments. The silence was her sharpest weapon. Brooke stared after her confused, then just shrugged it off. Over the next few days, Eleanor quietly shifted the whole dynamic in the house. She only bought groceries for herself and kept them in a small fridge in her room. When she cooked, she did it when the kitchen was empty. Nathan and Brooke started finding bare cupboards. Eleanor watched from a distance as Brooke's frustration built, but she stayed rock solid. One evening, she overheard them whispering in the living room. "Did you ask her about the credit card?" Brooke hissed. Nathan answered softly. "She barely talks to me anymore. She seems different." Eleanor smiled in the dark. They still had no idea the big bills were already bouncing. The banks would start sending letters soon, and Eleanor wouldn't be there to open them. The calm before the storm felt thick enough to touch. 15 days after that night with the laptop, the first letter arrived. It was a plain envelope from the bank addressed to Nathan and Brooke. Eleanor had pulled the account permissions. Brooke opened it over breakfast, while Eleanor sat at the far end of the table sipping her tea. She watched Brooke's face completely fall apart. Nathan. The mortgage didn't go through. Brooke cried out in panic. She glared at Eleanor. "What did you do?" Eleanor took a slow sip of tea and met her eyes directly. "I did exactly what you told me to do, Brooke. I shut my mouth. And since I'm only good for paying, I decided to turn off that function for any accounts that aren't strictly mine." Her tone was calm, almost businesslike. Nathan went pale. "But Mom, the house account. We don't have enough in there this month." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's a problem for the account holders. I've paid my own bills. My part is covered." Brooke jumped up. "You can't do this. We live here. If the bank forecloses, you lose everything too." Eleanor stayed seated. "The house is in my name, Brooke. The mortgage was nearly paid off. I was just carrying the last payments for your comfort. If you want to live here, you'll have to contribute your share. I already spoke with my banker. My personal assets are protected." She stood up and took the utility notice that had just arrived too. It threatened to shut off the power because the last payment had been reversed. Eleanor slid the letter across the table to Nathan without a word. "You're my son, Nathan. I love you. But I'm not your cash machine." She left the kitchen as Brooke started screaming. The psychological edge was now fully hers. She'd cut the financial cord, and Nathan and Brooke were starting to drown. The mood in the house flipped from passive-aggressive to full-blown panic. With the auto payments canceled, the late notices started pouring in by the hour. Brooke tried to bully Eleanor, ranting loudly about stubborn old people and ingratitude, but Eleanor just tuned it out. She'd put up with the nasty, belittling comments for years now. They bounced right off. By the third day, without payments, things got real. Brooke tried to take the new car out, but the insurance had temporarily suspended coverage because the premium hadn't been paid. The system had even remotely disabled the vehicle. Brooke stormed into Eleanor's room. "Give me your iPad. Right now, I need to make the transfer. My account's locked." Eleanor didn't look up from her book. "My devices are private, Brooke, just like my money." Nathan tried to play peacemaker, but he had no leg to stand on. He made decent money, but Brooke had blown it all on their flashy lifestyle. They had zero savings. Their total dependence on Eleanor's quiet payments had been their weak spot, and she'd hit it with surgical precision. Eleanor started reclaiming physical space too. She changed the locks on her home office and the little storage room next to it. She wasn't sharing her resources anymore. Nathan found her in the garden that afternoon. "Mom, we can't live like this." Brooke's losing it. Eleanor looked at her son sadly. "Nathan, you're 35. It's time you learned how to pay a bill." The house felt cold now, not from the temperature, but from all the shattered illusions. Eleanor had taken back control of the household simply by refusing to finance everyone else's chaos. Brooke desperately tried calling friends for money, but her image as the well-off wife was cracking fast. The bank's next move would decide everything. An official from the bank called. Eleanor took the call in the living room while Nathan and Brooke stood there like kids waiting for punishment. The bank demanded immediate payment of the arrears. Eleanor explained calmly as the owner, "I'll clear the house balance, but I'm permanently revoking the account access for Nathan and Brooke." Nathan breathed a sigh of relief, but Brooke spotted the catch right away. "What about my credit card?" she asked shrilly. Eleanor hung up and looked at her. "Your credit card isn't the house. That $4,200 is your debt, Brooke. I instructed the bank not to cover it from my accounts. You'll have to deal with collections yourself." Brooke's face twisted in rage. "You're ruining my credit. I'll never get another loan." Eleanor stayed completely unfazed. "Maybe that's the best lesson you could learn. You don't spend what you don't have." Nathan tried to step in. "But Mom, can't we just cover it this one time?" Eleanor's gaze hardened. "No, Nathan. If you want to help her take out a loan in your own name, my money stays with me." That was the moment it really hit Nathan. He looked at his wife, who was hysterically yelling at him to do something, then at his mother sitting there with quiet dignity. For the first time, he saw the clear difference between love and exploitation. Eleanor watched as Nathan slowly shook his head. He was starting to understand he had to choose between the woman who used him and the mother who was protecting him. Eleanor went to the kitchen and made herself a simple cup of tea. She'd built her financial wall and it was solid. The house was safe. Her retirement was safe. Everything else was now in the hands of the people who had treated her so disrespectfully. Brooke threatened to move out. Eleanor just said the door's open, but leave the key on the table. Brooke actually started packing her bags. She was sure Nathan would follow her and that Eleanor would be left alone and helpless. She made a big, dramatic scene in the hallway, throwing clothes into expensive luggage and calling for Nathan. Eleanor sat out on the patio watching the birds. She wasn't afraid of being alone. Alone was better than being disrespected. Nathan stood torn between the two women. He looked at Brooke's suitcases, then at his mother's calm figure. "Are you coming, Nathan?" Brooke shouted. "Or are you staying with this cold-hearted old witch?" Nathan looked at Eleanor. He probably hoped for some sign, some plea for him to stay. But Eleanor didn't give it. She respected his choices enough to let him walk away if that's what he wanted. Nathan said quietly, "I can't afford the fancy new apartment you picked out. Not without Mom's help." Brooke laughed bitterly. "Then get a better job. We can't stay in this prison." Nathan looked around the house his mother had cared for with so much love. He saw the cleanliness, the order, the security he'd always taken for granted. His decision didn't come with a big explosion, just a heavy sigh. He sat down on the stairs and buried his face in his hands. "I'm not going, Brooke. I can't keep paying for a lifestyle we don't actually have." Brooke stared at him in disbelief. She'd always controlled him, but without Eleanor's money, her hold over him had vanished. Eleanor heard the front door slam. Brooke was gone alone with her debts and her luggage. The house fell quiet. Eleanor walked inside and put a hand on Nathan's shoulder. She didn't say anything comforting, like he was a little boy. She was just there. Nathan looked up. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was blind." Eleanor nodded. "Now you can see, Nathan. That's what matters." After Brooke left, life in the house changed completely. Eleanor sat with Nathan at the kitchen table, the same one where Brooke had insulted her. This time, there were no late notices, just a simple sheet of paper. Eleanor had written down the new house rules. It wasn't a legal contract, just an agreement between two adults who were learning to respect each other. First, Eleanor said calmly, "You start paying fair rent and half of all the utilities from now on. I'll show you the bills at the end of every month. Second, chores are shared. I'm not your housekeeper." Nathan nodded eagerly. He looked relieved to finally have clear boundaries. Responsibility felt lighter than all the lies they'd been living in. She also told him she'd set up a separate account for home maintenance. "The money I used to spend on Brooke's luxuries now goes toward this house's future. If you want to stay, you invest in the walls and the roof, not in handbags." Nathan got it. He saw the house for the first time as something he had to earn, not just inherit. The silence had ended, but the conversations now carried a new seriousness. Nathan opened up about the secret debts Brooke had piled up in his name. Eleanor listened, but didn't offer money. She gave him straight advice. Talk to your boss about overtime. Sell the new car. Start fresh. It was tough love, but it was the only kind that could actually save him. Eleanor felt the $2,850 monthly burden lift off her shoulders. She had more money now than she had in years, but she didn't waste it. She bought herself some new gardening tools and booked a quiet little trip to the lakeshore by herself. She'd paid a high price for her peace, but it was worth every penny. The power balance was finally set right. 3 months later, the doorbell rang on a rainy November evening. Eleanor opened the door to find Brooke standing there. She didn't look like the proud, controlling woman from before. Her coat was soaked, her eyes puffy from crying. She'd heard about the collections calls and that Nathan was getting his life together without her. She wanted back into the safety of the house. "Eleanor, please," she sobbed. "It was all a misunderstanding. I was stressed. Let's be a family again." Eleanor stood in the doorway, calm and unmoving. She didn't need the police to keep Brooke out. She had the only barrier that mattered: her own resolve. She looked at Brooke and felt no hate, just a deep indifference. "You use Nathan and me as banks," Brooke Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "The bank is closed. Nathan's in the living room. He can tell you if he wants to see you. But you will never step foot in this house as a resident again. The locks have been changed, and my name is the only one on the deed." Brooke tried to push past her, but Eleanor stood firm. Nathan came into the hallway. He looked at Brooke, and Eleanor could see the pain in his eyes. But he also saw the freedom he'd gained in the last few months. "Please go, Brooke," he said softly. "I'll send the rest of your things. There's nothing left to talk about." He closed the door in her face. No big screaming match, no dramatic scene. Just the sound of a deadbolt clicking shut. Eleanor and Nathan went back to the kitchen and shared a cup of tea. "Was that hard?" Eleanor asked. Nathan shook his head. "No." It felt right. Eleanor was proud of her son. He'd learned to set boundaries. They had both learned you can't save someone who only wants to watch you drown. The victory was complete without any blood spilled or lawyers called. A year had passed. Eleanor sat in her backyard just outside Chicago, watching the first spring flowers push up through the soil. The house was quiet and peaceful. Nathan still lived with her, but now as a true partner in the household, not a freeloader. He'd paid off most of his debts and spent weekends happily helping her in the garden. They laughed together often, something that once seemed impossible. Eleanor had a firm grip on her finances. Every month she reviewed her statements not with dread anymore, but with quiet satisfaction. The money she'd saved let her live with dignity and independence. She'd even started a small fund to help widows in the neighborhood protect their own financial freedom. She didn't want other women to make the same mistake she had. Brooke had vanished from their lives. Sometimes Eleanor heard rumors that she was back living with her parents looking for new targets, but it didn't touch her anymore. She'd learned her lesson. You can't buy people with money, and you can't force respect by staying silent. You have to act when the line is crossed. That afternoon, Nathan brought her a cup of tea out to the garden. Here, Mom. Earl Grey. 2 spoons of sugar, just how you like it. Eleanor took the cup and felt the warmth against her fingers. Thank you, Nathan, she said, and she meant it with all her heart. It was only 2 words, but they were honestly earned. In this house, nothing was taken for granted anymore. Eleanor looked at her home. It wasn't just bricks and a mortgage anymore. It was her sanctuary, her territory. She had taken back control, not with violence or court orders, but with the simple decision to stop being the victim. Shut your mouth and pay, Brooke had once said. Eleanor smiled. She was quiet these days because she was happy, and she only paid for what truly mattered to her now. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply stop paying for what no longer respects you.